It happened without fire. No shouting. No scene. Just a sentence, like a loose tile giving way underfoot, and then a quiet fall no one saw. 3 days before Christmas. We were halfway to her parents' house outside of Austin. I'd driven that route 100 times. Each trip another mile toward a version of family I convinced myself was worth the bruises. Emma was in the back seat, headphones in, the blue light of her phone casting shadows across her face. That soft, distant glow children wear when they're deciding who you are to them. The highway was smooth. The silence between us, smoother. Then my wife, and I use that word now with a kind of cold respect, like a stranger's title, spoke without turning her head. Tyler is picking up Emma. She should spend the holiday with her real father. The words didn't carry venom. There was no raised tone, no accusation. Just the kind of truth people speak when they've already practiced it alone. Then softer. If that bothers you, we can end the marriage right now. That's when I knew she'd been waiting for this moment. Not fighting for it. Waiting. I didn't argue. I didn't clench the wheel or raise my voice. I nodded. Just nodded. And in that nod, I felt 16 years of compromise leave my body like steam. That night I said nothing. Not to her. Not to Emma. Not to the framed photos still clinging to the wall like ghosts too polite to leave. I went into the garage, opened the folder I had kept behind the insulation panel, the one with the documents, the passport, the offer letter from Seattle I'd ignored for 2 years. I packed a suitcase, not in anger but in precision. I left her the house, the furniture, the bills I'd already paid through January. I left my suits still pressed in the closet and the dinner plate still in the dishwasher from the meal she hadn't eaten. I left the portrait of Emma I'd sketched on her 12th birthday. She never looked at it again after Tyler sent her that iPad. The only thing I took, besides my name, was her old stuffed elephant from the attic. Torn ear. Button missing. She used to cry without it. Maybe she'd cry for me one day. Maybe not. By morning I was gone. By New Year's I was in Seattle. New apartment. New job. No contact. No scene. Just steps. Let me know what you'd like adjusted before I continue to part 2. The first call and the stream of messages / court day, no resistance. Remember that each part must contain strictly 8,000 characters. Make this part longer. Understood. I will expand part 1 to a full, cinematic version around 8,000 characters, adding deep introspection, internal conflict, and rich sensory detail while keeping strictly in the stepfather's first-person perspective. Here's the expanded part 1. 1. 3 days before Christmas, the breaking point / no scene, just steps. It happened in silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of something breaking. A soundless fracture running through the foundation of everything I thought I had built. It was 3 days before Christmas, the season that was supposed to be soft, warm, full of lights that made even the broken seem whole. We were driving to her parents' house in the suburbs outside Austin. The road stretched endlessly, headlights cutting through the early evening like sharp knives through mist. Emma sat in the back seat, her small frame hunched over a glowing screen, earbuds in, eyes distant and unreadable. She didn't look at me. She never did anymore, not really. She only acknowledged my presence when I appeared in the periphery of her convenience. I drove, feeling the hum of the tires over asphalt under my hands. The steering wheel felt heavy, not in weight but in responsibility. Every mile had always been a promise I kept silently. I kept the car clean, the fuel topped off, the house stocked, the bills paid, the moments of family curated like fragile glass ornaments that could shatter if anyone looked too closely. I had tried for years to weave a life that included her children, to bridge a gap that had never been mine to cross. Then she spoke. My wife. Her voice was even, flat, precise. Tyler is picking up Emma. She should spend the holiday with her real father. Her tone was not cruel. It was not even harsh. It was a statement of fact, detached, measured, like someone reading the weather aloud. And yet it carried with it the weight of 16 years of my sacrifice. A full lifetime of invisible labor, of sleepless nights, of evenings spent counting money for dinners, tuition, braces, college applications, and birthday presents. All of it invisible, except for the occasional nod I received from a child who now treated my very presence as optional. Then she added, quieter, almost wistful, "If that bothers you, we can end the marriage right now." It was a line I had not anticipated, though in some corner of my mind I had always feared it. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even breathe harder. I simply nodded. Nodded at a truth I had tried to ignore. I was expendable. The life I had invested in, the identity I had assumed, the man I had become in the service of others, it all meant nothing. Not to her. Not to the child I had raised. Not to the fragile idea of family I had clung to so desperately. I thought about Emma in the back seat. She would spend Christmas with someone who shared her blood, someone who carried none of the weight I had carried for her entire life. Tyler, the real father, a man who had appeared only occasionally, a ghost, a passing wind, a placeholder for biology without substance. And yet that was enough for them. Blood was enough. Love, presence, commitment, effort. None of it mattered. That night I packed my bags. Midnight found me quietly in the apartment we had shared, the house still asleep, the room silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of pipes settling in the cold winter air. I packed methodically, deliberately, without emotion or theatrics. Not a shred of anger, not a single note of grief. I took the essentials. My passport, a folder of documents I had long neglected, Emma's old stuffed elephant, the one she had refused to leave behind when she was 8, with its missing button eye and torn ear. Everything else stayed. The furniture, the linens, the plates, the bills I had already paid, the January utilities, the photos, the ornaments, even the framed pictures I had hung on the wall. Every trace of my existence within that space I left intact, almost like a gift. I moved silently through the house, each step an acknowledgement of a life I was abandoning but also claiming. I did not lock doors. I did not slam drawers. I left her every convenience I had ever provided, every comfort I had built with my labor, and I walked out without a single glance back. Driving to the airport, the roads were slick with rain. Streetlights reflected in puddles like tiny, distant suns. I watched the city blur past. I thought about the years I had given, the nights I had worked double shifts, the college tuition I had paid, the dinners, the birthdays, the sick days, the summers at the lake I had rented so they could feel something like belonging. I thought about all the thank yous I never received, the eyes that barely met mine, the words, "You're not my father," that echoed now with renewed weight. By the time I landed in Seattle, the city was quiet, fog rolling in from the water, the skyline a ghostly silhouette behind the airport glass. I collected my luggage, carried the elephant in one hand, the folder in the other, and walked into a new life that was waiting for me, fully formed, if unclaimed. The apartment was modest but mine, bare but sufficient. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, setting each item in place. For the first time in years, I was the center of my own existence. Not a caretaker, not a provider, not a shadow. Just me. And in that realization, I felt something I had long forgotten. Clarity. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was truth. I had chosen the life I wanted, the life I had denied myself for 16 years. The weight of expectation, the silent demands, the invisible labor. It was gone. I had left it behind on the roads of Austin, in the house filled with unacknowledged devotion. I had left it there and I would not retrieve it. I sat in the empty apartment, the city lights spilling faintly through the blinds, and thought about her, about Emma, about the marriage that had ended not with rage or conflict, but with an almost clinical declaration. And I felt nothing, not sadness, not bitterness, not regret, just a profound understanding that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop carrying everyone else's life as if it were your own. And so I began to write the first page of a new life. One where my name mattered first, my choices mattered first, my presence mattered first. One where silence was not neglect but freedom. Where steps, no matter how quiet, could carry me forward without fear of erasure. 3 days before Christmas, I learned the only thing I could truly give myself was absence. And it was enough. The first call came like a blade through fog. My phone vibrated against the countertop in the empty Seattle apartment. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the tone, the insistence in the voice on the other end, told me exactly who it was. My wife. Tyler, you owe me an explanation. It wasn't a question. It was a summons, a demand, a judgment delivered from miles away, her words carrying the authority of a woman who believed she had the right to dictate my conscience even after she had, in essence, released me from the house that had become her stage. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped, the harsh digital voice fading into the silence of the apartment, my quiet sanctuary. Then came the texts. 1, 2, 3 dozens over the next hour. At first, she tried authority. This is unacceptable. You need to call me back immediately. Then softer. Can we talk? Please just talk. And finally, edged with panic. You're not really taking Emma forever, are you? I saved every message, every word. I knew how strategy hides behind guilt, how desperation masks calculation. The record would matter. Every syllable would become an arrow pointing to the truth. I had been ignored, dismissed, unacknowledged for years. Days later, I walked into the courthouse in King County. The building smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold metal, the kind of antiseptic odor that cleans the body but cannot touch the weight of human failure. I had been here before, though not for myself, always representing others, always mediating, never center stage. Today, the center was mine. She appeared with the kind of composure one builds over decades. Flawless makeup, hair tucked into a style that declared authority without a word, posture perfect, a mask no man could pierce. Her attorney flanked her, words rehearsed, eyes sharp. They had done this before. They were confident. And yet, I had already anticipated every argument, every motion, every attempt to sway the scales. My client waives custody. The father can take the child. Everything else remains with her. The attorney said, fast, efficient, a recital of preordained legality. I signed the papers. My hand did not tremble. My heart did not skip. I had been ready for this for longer than she or anyone knew. Years of sacrifice, of invisible labor, of carrying a family that had refused to see me, all condensed into one clean line of ink. I was done. I had given enough. They thought the story ended there, that the child would be theirs, and that I would vanish quietly. But I had prepared for this. I had been preparing for this in silence, in the late nights when Emma slept with her tiny hand curled around her elephant, in the hours I counted bills and tuition payments, in the endless grocery runs and the car repairs, the birthdays, the school trips, the silent prayers that I could make a difference even when the difference was unseen. The clerk paused, a subtle hesitation that felt like the floor shifting beneath me. He rifled through the file, eyes narrowing, lips pressing thin. And then he spoke, not to me, but to the room, loud enough for all to hear. Hold on. There's an amendment here. According to Attachment C, the property assigned to the child exceeds the amount claimed by the mother's side. The attorney froze, a flash of confusion crossing her practiced face. She had not anticipated this. My wife's composure faltered, just enough for a human crack to appear. What does that mean? She whispered, the words almost desperate, fragile. It means you just signed over everything, the clerk said, because the child, as you referred to him, is now listed as the owner of assets you did not review before signing. Her eyes went wide. Not fear, not anger, but the cold realization that the world she thought she controlled had slipped through her fingers. The shares, the house equity, the vehicle, all placed into a trust months earlier under the child's name by me. Every line of preparation invisible, every step meticulous. It wasn't revenge. I never sought revenge. It was defense, a boundary, a statement. I didn't need to fight because the paperwork, the preparation, the foresight had done it for me. She stared at me, not with rage, but with the dawning comprehension that she had misread everything, that she had counted on assumptions and hollow gestures. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Silence was heavier than any argument. Later, she called again. Her voice trembled in a way I had not heard in years. You set this up. No. You ignored it, I said calmly. Her voice cracked. She begged, pleaded for what could no longer be undone. The house, the car, even a fraction of the control she had lost. Talk to your lawyer. You got what you asked for. You just didn't understand what you signed. I told her. Her sobs carried through the line. And still I felt no anger. Only clarity. The clarity that comes when a man has been giving, sacrificing, laboring, and finally understands that the only respect he will receive is the respect he demands by refusing to be silent any longer. The papers, the filings, the careful orchestration of years' worth of unseen labor, they were not P***ns. They were shields. Shields that had allowed me to step away from a family that never acknowledged me, from a role I had fulfilled without reward, from a life I had been told was mine only in name. In that courthouse, under fluorescent lights and the steady hum of bureaucracy, I realized something simple. Winning wasn't the point. Surviving was. Leaving on my own terms, with my dignity intact, was the only victory I would ever need. And in the quiet aftermath, I walked out. Not triumphant, not bitter. Just free. Free from expectation. Free from a family that had never truly seen me. Free from the weight of sacrifices unacknowledged. Outside, the city was gray, cold, indifferent. And it didn't matter. Because inside, I was lighter than I had been in 16 years. Because finally I had drawn the line. I had chosen myself. And that choice would echo for the rest of my life. They thought it was over. That I had quietly stepped away. That the chapter had closed with her surrendering custody, with the ink of signatures drying on a page that was supposed to define control, ownership, and authority. They were wrong. And they would find out, in the harshest of ways, that a man who has been erased in life can still wield quiet power in absence. The court clerk paused mid-sentence, the monotony of bureaucracy cracking under a subtle shift. I had noticed the hesitation immediately, the slight furrow of his brow, the way he held the file at arm's length, the slow double-checking of a page as if the paper itself might bite. I felt the moment stretch in the air like thick syrup, every second amplified by years of anticipation. Every heartbeat a reminder that this world bends to preparation, not sentiment. Hold on. There's an amendment here, the clerk said, voice neutral but firm. According to Attachment C, the property assigned to the child exceeds the amount claimed by the mother's side. Her attorney froze. That confident mask cracked first. A twitch of the lips. A sudden pallor. The kind of realization that strikes the best prepared of people like a stone through a window. What does that mean? She whispered, almost afraid to ask. It means, the clerk said, flipping through the pages once more, that you just signed over everything, because the child, as you called him, is now listed as the owner of assets you did not read before signing. She looked at me then, not with fury, not even with shock, with disbelief, fragile, raw, that someone she thought subordinate, someone she assumed compliant, had quietly orchestrated the inevitable. The air shifted. Every breath in the room became heavier, each second pressing like a weight upon her chest. For months I had prepared this, not to humiliate, not for vengeance, not for pride. Every step I took, every transfer, every trust, every carefully constructed legal shield had been a measure of defense, not attack. A man who has been denied acknowledgement, spat upon by words and silence, can still protect what is his, and in this case what belonged to the child whose life she assumed she controlled. The shares, the equity in the house, the vehicle, all quietly, irreversibly, redirected. Months ago, the trust had been formed, meticulously, under the child's name. Every potential loophole sealed. Every document notarized, recorded, unquestionable. She had assumed that my devotion would continue unbroken, that my identity as caretaker would persist unquestioned. She had counted on it. She had relied on it. And now she discovered she had been relying on nothing at all. Her eyes flickered from the clerk to me, a silent accusation forming on the edge of her lips. But I did not answer. I did not move. Silence was a more powerful P***n than words, and years of ignored presence had taught me the strength in invisibility. I had learned that sometimes the world recognizes you only when you stop bending to it, only when you refuse to inhabit a role they do not honor. She tried to speak. She opened her mouth, tried to assert control, tried to claim ignorance as innocence. I didn't know. But the clerk had already continued, reading aloud, precise, deliberate, immutable. The property, including shares, equity, and vehicle interests, now belongs to the child by trust. The mother's claim is void under the amendment and prior transfer. Her voice shrank, tiny, ineffective. The reality of the legal trap. My shield, my preparation, my invisible years of planning, pressed down like a tide. She thought she had control. She thought I was powerless. She had not accounted for preparation, for anticipation, for the quiet patience of a man wronged silently for years. I leaned back, calm, observing. I had no need to gloat. I had no desire to humiliate. I had simply let the instruments of law and foresight execute themselves. Each page, each clause, each attachment was a testament not to vengeance, but to boundaries finally recognized. You signed everything over, I said finally, my voice quiet, low, almost mundane in its neutrality. Because you assumed someone else's devotion could be taken for granted. You assumed presence equaled permission. It does not. Her attorney turned to me, eyes wide, a question unspoken. Why? I did not answer with words. The truth was written on the pages of the trust, on the lines of the amendment, in the signatures she had already placed. Actions had been taken years before she realized, and there was no erasure, no undoing, no redemption for her assumptions. I had acted precisely when required, and in silence. The child, the boy who was never mine in blood but always mine in care, had been given protection. Protection from the negligence she had always relied upon. Protection from the assumption that devotion is indefinite, that sacrifice is invisible, that presence can be disregarded. She wanted the house. She wanted the car. She wanted control over the life of the child she had given birth to. And for a brief moment, I imagine, she believed she would have it all. But she had misread the years of unseen labor, the quiet accumulation of foresight, the long patience that had been disguised as compliance. It was not revenge. I do not seek revenge. I had no desire to punish. I had a moral duty, a fiduciary responsibility that stretched beyond her whims. I had to act in the child's best interest, even if she could not understand that my definition of interest extended to more than immediate gratification or shallow notions of control. I signed off on nothing that was hers to command. I let the machinery of preparation run its course. Each asset transferred, each line of equity assigned, each document executed, a statement. That devotion, that labor, that invisible presence cannot be erased by anger, by entitlement, by superficial claims of authority. She tried to speak again, small, ineffective, almost hysterical. You set me up. You tricked me. No, I said quietly. You ignored it. You relied on my silence. You counted on my acquiescence. And now you discover that the consequences of your assumptions are yours to bear. The courthouse smelled of paper and cold metal, of years of human conflict distilled into bureaucracy. And there I stood, silent, steady, unmoving, a man who had finally realized the only power that mattered was the one earned, not given. The lesson was simple. Preparation is respect. Boundaries are power. Years of invisible labor deserve acknowledgement, or they will demand it in form stronger than words. Her sobs came, quiet, restrained, unheeded. I did not step forward. I did not speak louder. I only observed, as one might observe the tides eroding a shoreline, inexorable, patient, absolute. She had assumed the currents would bend to her desire. They did not. When the clerk finally stamped the papers, the finality rang through the room with a dull, hollow thud. Everything that could be transferred had been. Nothing could be undone. The boy's future, once dependent on assumptions, on my continued patience, on the invisible scaffolding I had erected for years, was now insulated from neglect. She left the courthouse not with victory, but with shock, humiliation, and fear. I walked out with no triumph, no satisfaction, only clarity. I had done what was necessary. I had drawn a line, not of anger but of principle. And that line would hold because it was defined not by emotion, but by years of unacknowledged labor, by patience, by foresight, by the understanding that devotion is a gift, and when rejected, must be defended by force of preparation, not fury. 2 hours after court, the phone rang again. I recognized the tone immediately, the subtle tremor under the surface of her voice, the fragile edge that only surfaces when control has been wrested away. She had realized, too late, that the game she believed she controlled had already been lost. You set this up. Her words were accusation, disbelief, pleading, all intertwined. No, I said softly. You ignored it. There was silence. Then a choked whisper. I don't understand. The house, the car, everything. I did not answer immediately. I let the pause stretch, heavy, deliberate. Years of labor, of invisible sacrifice, of every meal, every tuition check, every sleepless night that had gone unnoticed, were compressed into that silence. It was heavier than any argument, more potent than any scream. She had miscalculated. She had assumed compliance. She had assumed my presence would be infinite, unchallenged, unaccountable. And now she realized that absence was more powerful than presence, that preparation outweighed control. Talk to your lawyer, I said finally. You received what you asked for. You just didn't read the documents. You just didn't see the terms you agreed to. That's all there is to it. Her sobs cracked the line. Not loud, not theatrical, just sharp, brittle, tremulous. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, only clarity. A man who has been giving, sacrificing, and laboring for years, only to be spat upon by indifference and entitlement, knows that the proper measure of response is neither vengeance nor cruelty. It is detachment and adherence to principle. She pleaded, begged, tried to reclaim the fragments of control she believed she had lost. Can't you at least give me back the car? The house? Anything? I remained calm, my voice steady, a statement of moral fact, not emotion. Everything you asked for is yours, but you didn't understand what you signed. You didn't read the documents. You didn't see the trust. You didn't consider the consequences of your assumptions. Everything was laid out plainly. You ignored it. She cried then, openly, without pretense, but I did not soften. I could not. Not because I lacked compassion, but because the lesson she had tried to deny for years had to arrive intact, in full measure. Respect is earned. Presence is conditional. Devotion, when taken for granted, must be defended by action, not words. The irony of her position was clear. She had spent years raising a boy, instructing him, guiding him, while I bore the labor of sustenance, education, and safety. All her lessons, all her authority, were now confronted by the immutable truth that the life of the child she assumed she controlled was, in fact, insulated from neglect not by her presence, but by the man she never acknowledged. You don't understand, she whispered, shaking. I didn't, No. I interrupted, calm, precise. You do understand. You have always understood, even if you refused to acknowledge it. You understood that my presence carried everything, that my labor financed comfort, that my care shielded you and him, and you chose to ignore it. I thought of every meal I had cooked, every fee I had paid, every car repair, every tuition installment. The years I had bent under the weight of responsibility for another man's child. The nights spent counting pennies so his dreams would remain intact. The long hours of work while he slept, unaware, indifferent, assuming this was all natural, automatic, endless. I never. Yes, I said, cutting through the trembling. You did. You never acknowledged. You never appreciated. You took for granted the labor of a man who believed love meant presence. You allowed a boy to grow up thinking devotion is owed, not earned. That is what you did. And now you are learning the consequences. She gasped, tried to argue, tried to claim oversight, ignorance, or accident. But the truth is merciless and unyielding when it has been documented, executed, and irretrievable. The trust, the filings, the careful preparation months ago had anticipated every potential claim, every moment of desperation, every demand for reversal. I had not acted in anger. I had acted in defense. I paused, letting the silence fill the space. The line carried only the brittle sound of her surrender, the sobs that could no longer reach me. I could feel the weight of the years between us. The accumulation of invisible labor finally crystallized in consequence. And I realized, once again, that clarity is sometimes cruelty to those who refuse to see. "I'm sorry," she said finally, quiet, hollow, the kind of apology that arrives too late to matter. I did not reply, not because I lacked capacity, but because the moment was not for reconciliation. The lesson was delivered, unavoidable, absolute. Respect is conditional. Devotion has limits. Presence can be denied. And a man who has been ignored for 16 years will finally assert boundaries in the only way that matters, with consequences that cannot be reversed. I hung up. The room was silent. The city beyond my window was gray, cold, indifferent. I looked at the stuffed elephant I had brought from Austin, its button missing, its fabric worn, a relic of a child who once trusted me. And I felt the strange weightlessness of a burden lifted, the quiet satisfaction that comes when a moral line has been drawn and finally enforced. The calls would come again, the messages, the pleadings, perhaps even threats, appeals, or desperate attempts at persuasion. But nothing would change the principle I had established. I had given all I could, all I was asked to, all that was mine to give. And when the boy and his mother refused to recognize it, the only proper response was to withdraw, to let consequence fill the void left by entitlement. I sat for hours, the phone silent beside me. For the first time in years, the apartment was mine in more than possession. It was mine in principle. My labor, my presence, my devotion. No longer invisible, no longer taken for granted. They had taught me the cost of assumption. I had met it with clarity. And as the city lights flickered against the rain-streaked glass, I understood fully. It was never about punishment. It was about truth. It was about boundaries. It was about finally reclaiming the life I had sacrificed for others who refused to see me. I closed the blinds, sat in silence, and for the first time I was free. Not whole, not healed, but free. The calls would come. The messages would continue. The reckoning, delayed, inevitable. But I had drawn the line. And once drawn, it could never be erased. Freedom had a price, and they would pay it in full measure for their assumptions, their neglect, and their disregard. Because once a man has been told he is nothing, the only path to reclaiming self is to act as though they were right, and let the consequences of their belief fall squarely where they belong.